Welcome to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast, episode 10. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. This week I'm talking to Dave Jordan. I've known Dave for quite a while, and it's always fun to get a chance to talk to him. Dave's done a lot of great work in comics, from his Slice of Life series, Where Do We Go From Here?, his anthropomorphic detective Myths, his Thor pastiche / Jack Kirby homage Volk, and now, most recently, his really cool and dark and slightly disturbing heavy metal drawings. From his Grim Reaper series to his more current series, which I don't think has a name, but if you like drippy skulls and creepy artwork, this is definitely for you. I've been wanting to talk to Dave about what's kind of led him from his comics to these illustrations and what's in the future with his comic work, because I know he's always got something brewing, and I'm really excited to see what he has coming next. So let's jump in. So Dave, one of the most interesting shifts in terms of artwork and production from my friends is what you've been doing lately. And that's kind of going from these personal mini comics and these kind of out there comics as well, like Volk or Myths. And you've kind of gotten into this almost, graphic design career doing these heavy metal logos. And most recently you did one for, writer Donny Cates' fan club,
yes,
the Advocates. How'd that come about?
Well, actually, I've known Donny for years. We first met when I don't even know if he had a book out, but he used to just go to comic conventions and just walk around. So we met, I'm pretty sure, at a C2E2 many years ago. And, we just kind of had a casual, hey, dude, how's it going kind of thing, every time we would see each other. And, we might hang out like one night after the show or something, that kind of thing. We were, acquaintances. And I guess it was 2 years ago at Memphis Comic Expo, which is a really good show, but it's very small. I happened to be there, and Donnie and his then fiancée Megan were also there. And I had kind of just started to do more of like the skulls and the merch stuff. Mm-hmm. And at my table, I had the Crunchwrap Supreme shirt.
Yeah.
And the Ritual shirt, which is the deer skull.
Yeah, that one's really nice.
Thanks, man. And Megan really, she just was walking around. I was seated kind of across from the green room. So I think maybe what had happened is they had gotten a snack and Megan came out first or something. But basically, Megan came over to the table. She was just she really liked the shirt. And then Donnie came out of the green room and came over and he was like, oh, hey, man. And, we had our little catch up. And she was so into the shirt that she bought the shirt, but then they actually also bought the original art for that shirt.
Cool.
And then since Memphis is such a small show, pretty much, the 15 comic creators that knew each other, we all hung out after the show and we did this ghost tour and everything. So, having already known Donnie, I got to become friends with Megan and all this. And we just kind of kept in touch a little bit here and there. And basically, Megan just approached me to do this logo. I think I had posted a logo that I had done for a band, and she saw that, liked it, and just kind of asked, is this something that you do freelance? Would you be interested to do something for, the Devil's Advocates, like Donnie's fan club? And, being friends, I was all about it. I love doing the work anyway. So even if it was a stranger, I still would have agreed, I'm sure. But, it's always more fun to do it with somebody that you can kind of work with, because you already have a little bit of a relationship.
Yeah.
And so I did that, I don't know, probably 6 months ago. And it's been real hard to not talk about it before they announced it, because I really liked it, and it was a lot of fun because, both of them, and Megan certainly, and we have a very similar sensibility. We even have similar tattoos and stuff. So I was just kind of I want to check, but I'm pretty sure you guys wouldn't mind if I made the O into a pentagram and turned the T into an upside down cross. And she was like, yes, no, more pentagrams, upside down crosses. Let's do this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's not a super glamorous or exciting story necessarily. It just kind of became friends, and they needed some work done. So, that's...
No, I think it's really cool, because when they announced it and all that, I didn't even see that you did it. I just saw the design, and at first I was like, well, someone's ripping off Dave, because that looked just like what you did. And then I actually read what they posted, and I'm like, oh shit, it's Dave, awesome.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, well, yeah, this is kind of a perfect fit, because what I know of Donnie, and again, you guys have in the Venn diagram of interest and all that, you guys seem to have a lot of overlap. So
yeah,
it made perfect sense to me, and I was like, oh, that's awesome, that's so awesome. Especially since I remember when we first met on the EOC 11 O'Clock Comics forums.
Yeah.
And then more so on Twitter. I remember DMing you when you're just getting back into making art, and you're like, what about these pens? What about these pens? And
oh yeah, yeah.
And I just I kind of I've had conversations with people in various degrees about their emergence in certain things and all that, and just seeing where they're at now, and it's just so awesome to kind of see the direction you've taken, and how you've kind of found not necessarily your comfort zone, but you found what seems to suit you really well, and what you seem to do really well, which is these death metal logos, and though some may say they're still too legible.
Right. Well, so that's the interesting thing, is I actually have done a couple that are illegible, at the direction of the client.
Oh yeah,
right?
of course.
But the interesting twist about it is that most of the ones I've done haven't been for bands. They've been for just kind of fans of the work who own their own business or whatever it might be, and it's not actually specifically metal related.
Didn't you do one as a electrician or something, or something?
Yeah, so a friend of mine in town, he is an electrician, but his main business is amp repair, guitar amps.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
but it's Caldera Electronics, so I did that one. A buddy of mine used to own the local Music Around franchise. I don't know if you guys have Music Arounds in Chicago.
Yeah. I don't know if they're still around, but
okay.
When I still lived in Chicago, there were a few still.
Yeah, so for the listener, Music Arounds are basically a chain of used musical instrument stores. So
a franchise pawn shop, essentially.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I did the 20th anniversary shirt for the Albuquerque Music Around branch. I did one for this weird tech consulting firm based in San Francisco. To be perfectly clear, I don't even totally understand what that guy does, but he saw the work and he was like, I want this for my company. And I'm like, okay. I did one freelance for just a like a writer. I think he's a writer, but he works for Cartoon Network or something like that. I think it's Cartoon Network. And he was just like, I want a metal logo of my name for my business card.
That's awesome.
Right? But so the flip side of those people is like they actually do want them to be a little bit more legible because they are actually being used as marketing.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of interesting because like I'll go nuts and I'll make them totally illegible. But
So
most of the time the people do kind of want me to like keep them a little bit more on the readable side.
I do have a question about the illegible ones.
Yeah.
Do you start with it being legible and you just slowly work it until it's not? Or is it just kind of like free-forming it until you think you can see the name?
No, I don't think I could ever do that. I do need to sketch them out a little bit. Like I need to have some sort of a plan because one thing I learned really quickly is that like anything, it is kind of a skill and it's a muscle and you do kind of need to practice. And one thing I learned is that like balance is really important. You know, you look at a lot of metal logos and they're not necessarily totally symmetrical, but they're pretty symmetrical and they're very evenly weighted. You know, frequently on the ends, they're bigger, you know, the tails go up, whatever it might be. So I always do need to sketch it out. I need to plan it out. I usually do like a little bit of a sketch on a Post-it note just to kind of get the shape I want in place. And then before like moving to the full size, but they all pretty much start legible. And then, yeah, I just kind of push them until I feel like they've hit the right place.
Awesome. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to try, even just doodling around or anything like that. You learn quickly, like, oh, there is like an art to this kind of chaotic.
Yeah. Because you can, I mean, you could easily push one area too far, and then it doesn't fit the rest of the logo, or, you know, and depending on the name, the title that you're working with, the style does kind of have to fit with the name, with the word a little bit. That's a little bit more flexible, but that is definitely something that like you kind of have to learn just by doing, you know, do one that like, because I've done some that I just scrapped because I finished them and I was just like, this just doesn't look right. As you hear it, a word or a name, and you kind of can picture it, what it might look like, and sometimes it just doesn't translate if you try and work it in a weird way. Like a lot of things, if you think about something too hard, you kind of lose the flow of it. You know?
Yeah.
So if you try and do a logo in a way that's like, I'm going to try and do something really interesting and different with this one, it almost never works. It's one of those instinctual things. You got to kind of just go with it.
Which you apply to basically all art. You know, whenever you're like, I'm going to do this really cool, interesting layout on this page, and then it just ends up being like, no, I should just did a grid. That just doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that. Yeah,
so
instincts are almost always right.
Yeah. So on top of these logos that you've been doing and are commissioned to do and all that, you've also kind of, I guess, pivoted a little bit into these darker illustrations, these, you know, kind of like ghouls and skulls and kind of, you know, just stark black and white illustrations. Yeah. And coming from, you know, from where you started getting back into art, from, your series Where Do We Go From Here, from the Thor kind of I don't want to say pastiche, that seems kind of,
No, that's totally fair.
Volk, which was a
Yeah.
lot, which was like a love letter to like Kirby crazy
Oh
cosmic
yeah. Yeah.
Thor stuff, or your feline detective mitts. Going into this, it seems like kind of like if we didn't know you, or if I didn't know you, it would seem like a really weird pivot. But
Yeah.
knowing what I know about you and your interests and things like that, I can see some through lines. But for others, like what was kind of like the progression to lead into kind of like get into these things? Was it something natural, or is it something like I kind of have these images and I need to do these before I kind of like get back to doing anything more, I guess, lighthearted or at least
Sure.
realistic? Or
It's a little bit of both, actually. I've always really, really liked darker artwork. I mean, even going back to like when I was studying art in college, like I always kind of gravitated towards stuff like I don't know if you're familiar with the artist Kathy Kollwitz.
no, I'm not.
Okay, so well, she did these very kind of dark pencil and graphite drawings, but they're all kind of they're of like these weird kind of almost ethereal portrayals of death, like grabbing people and stuff like that, and it's just really like sad and emotional and very powerful stuff. And I've always kind of gravitated towards that. I've always had a place in my heart for like the darker side of artistic expression, I guess. And the exact timeline of these things is I don't know that I can actually tell you exactly where all this stuff came from, but I basically hit a period of we'll call it like a lack of productivity. Before we started, you and I were talking about how I did kind of come off this year and a half where I was basically just like extremely prolific. Like I did a ton of pages and I released a lot of books. And then things in my life kind of really started to explode. And as a result, my work situation changed drastically. And I was no longer super productive. And I didn't have a clear path as to what I was going to do. I had kind of a couple of projects that were like half done and kind of in the works and not necessarily feeling super good about really getting into those because things had changed kind of internally for me so much that I didn't know how comfortable I would really be jumping into these things. And somewhere around that time, I remember having this thought process and maybe even a conversation with somebody about it, but basically being like, I love all this like dark artwork. I love, skulls and metal and all this stuff. And I was like, but I don't do that. Like, I just don't do it. And I distinctly remember being like, well, the only reason I don't do it is just because I just don't do it. Like, I'm an artist. If I want to do this, just like anything else, like when I started making comics, I mean, you know this, like my work at the very beginning was not that great, because I hadn't developed the muscle, So I basically was just like, if I want to do this, I just have to start doing it. Mm-hmm. And the first kind of forays into it aren't going to be exactly what I want, They're not going to be exactly where I end up, and I know that. But, you know, just like anything else, if I want to get good at this, if I want to produce this kind of work more, I just have to do it. You know, so I started doing the Grim Reapers, which was a pretty big turning point for me. But even the first couple of those, I was not sure what they were, you know, like they were basically just black blobs with a skull drawing, which was very different from what they became, which were these kind of like, you know, more expressionistic, like lots of splatter and implied shapes and stuff like that, rather than like just a black blob that looked like a cloak or whatever. But that was really like a turning point for me, because I also kind of feel like people can tell when you're doing work that you're really passionate about and that you're really excited about and that you're really feeling. I think it comes through in the work. And it's kind of, you know, in line with what you mentioned, in that, like, you know me, so like when I kind of started shifting into this, it wasn't that much of a surprise, because it's a fairly natural fit for me as a person to create this kind of work. And while I certainly had people that were fans of my comics, and very, very grateful to all those people and all the support that they've given me over the years, as soon as I started doing work like this, it was like night and day. People started to like be excited by the work, which, you know, as an artist, feeds right back into the work.
Yes, definitely.
So, you know, I started doing these things, and people were like obviously very excited that I was doing this. And I think in some ways, you know, surprised, because I had just kind of done, you know, slice of life comics, obviously Mitz, Volk, like, and I loved doing those projects. And, you know, someday I'd like to get back to doing more of that stuff. But it is hard to ignore the fact that, like, you know, I started doing this work and people started to pay attention to it. And that's not to say that, like, I'm doing this so people can pay attention to it, because I'm doing it because I love doing it. Like, it's real fun to draw corpses and skeletons and dripping things and dark things and gross things. Like, it is really fun to do it.
Totally.
But not that it's a measure of success or quality at all, but, you know, since I started doing this, like, darker stuff, like, my Instagram following has, like, tripled. You know, my Twitter following has gone up. I've made, you know, I've started doing band merchandise. I've started doing album covers. You know, you already mentioned the logos, like, that kind of goes right into it. You know, I'm doing freelance logos for people, and it is hard to not wrap that kind of public attention into the success of the feeling of personal success.
Oh no, it's
you know what I mean?
I can totally understand where you're coming from, where you have something, you know, and I'm sure completely unexpected to you that it kind of took off the way it did.
Yeah.
From an outsider's perspective myself, I can see why, because that kind of imagery, that kind of work, I think it crosses all kinds of boundaries for people. You know, and I kind of, you know, and I think I kind of spoke with Brian Level a little bit about this last episode, where it's this kind of, it hits more people than we think in a certain way, than and not just metal people, you know.
Yeah.
Not
no,
just,
for sure.
you know, it just expands. But on the flip side, you know, I think it also opened up a lot of people to you. And I don't know if you've seen any people, like, kind of go back to stuff. I don't know what if your stuff's available, your older stuff is available for others. I don't know if you've seen any kind of correlation that people going back and maybe checking out, a PDF of Volk or anything like that.
A little bit. Not a ton, to be perfectly honest.
I do think though, if with having an expanded audience now, if you're going to be going back to stuff like that, I think you'll definitely see an uptick. It may not match the same, may not be a 1-for-1 ratio, but versus the response before this, I definitely think, because I think as you've been doing this for a while now, and I think people are less, not that it's not great work, less like fans of particular work and more fans of Dave. And kind of cultivating that and having that kind of fan base that you can start when eventually you do feel comfortable getting back to these other things. I think you're going to see some success or more success.
You might be right. I don't know. It's hard to say because I've always, since my comic work was pretty varied, I certainly had my supporters, and a lot of them were friends or became friends. But I could always kind of tell when somebody was a fan of one of my things. Like, just because somebody was a fan of Sadman did not mean that they were going to translate to being a fan of one of the other things. So it's really kind of hard to say. You might be very right. But I might also, put out another comic and be like, hey, everybody, I've got a new comic. And people will be like, get back to the corpses.
Well,
it remains to be seen. But
in all fairness, that's kind of comics in general, though.
Yeah, sure. That's true. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully the people that did or do really like my comics will still be there when I get back to them. And I mean, like, I didn't leave comics. I'm still doing some. It's just my productivity has shifted, and the amount of comics that I've worked on in the past, couple of years has dropped down significantly, kind of in lieu of this other, just more illustrative work.
Well, I think, as someone who's a fan of your comics and knowing other fans of your comics, I think this, as much as we would, I would love to see another issue of Volk or, something else from like the way you do a slice of life story or, something with Mitts or, anything else. I'm also, completely understanding in like, as an artist, you need to like follow the paths that you need to follow to, become better, become more confident, become more rounded as an artist.
Sure.
As someone who, can say like, I've gone down the wrong paths a few times, and someone who feels like he's finally starting to course correct, I can say from that perspective that it's all completely necessary though, because when you do get back to that, it's going to be so much stronger. It's going to hit a lot differently, but better, I think.
Right. Yeah, because, I hope so.
I keep bringing up Volk just because it's probably one of my favorite things you've done. But
it was one of my favorite things that I've done too.
You were very much doing a Jack Kirby by way of Dave Jordan.
Yeah.
But I think if you've taken, how you've grown now and apply that, and I know you kind of discussed how it wouldn't be, I think you were, hopefully I'm not spoiling anything, but you were kind of thinking like maybe doing like a more Walter Simonson inspired kind of look and things like that. I think the Dave now would do that, a lot better than the Dave a couple years ago who did the first Volk.
Yeah, you might be right. I mean, it like you said, it's all kind of part of the artistic path, right? And
Yeah.
and you know, you said you've taken a couple of wrong steps along the way, and I think everybody has, right? I mean, we all, as artists, we're always taking in things, and everything we take in is an influence in some way or another.
Yeah.
Certainly if we respond to it. So, pretty much everybody sees an artist, and it could be anybody, right? Like, somebody sees Chris Somney, and they're like, shit, this Somney guy is amazing. I want to do that. But the fact of the matter is, almost nobody can.
No.
But, we kind of take that in. We might even try and do it. We might try and emulate it. And it might not click, but we still hopefully learn lessons from it. And it shapes our actual artistic output that is more in line with our actual voice, just through the process. And Valk is a good example because I was very, very clearly just doing my best Kirby. It was still very much me, but it was me trying to do Kirby. And I learned from that. And I mean, as you know, for the listeners out there, I'm a ridiculous Kirby mark. Like, I have a Kirby tattoo. I have, a bookshelf full of books. I have it's ridiculous, right?
I still remember the Kirby Hands tumbler you had.
Yeah, exactly. See, I didn't even remember that. I didn't in talking about it. But yeah, I ran a Tumblr that was just pictures of hands that Kirby drew. And but in doing Valk and doing my best to emulate Kirby in that way, I did learn lessons. Do I draw like Kirby now? No, of course not. Nobody does, and nobody ever will. But we learn things from then. And I think that was a good step forward for me. But for somebody else, trying to do something like that might be a step down the wrong direction. And they might not develop in the way that they want,
No, I think an
so
important
in
distinction with that,
taking this side step to the more metal stuff, the more darker stuff, it's just more in the path, it's more in the development. Like, when I go back and draw some stuff that's not corpses and decaying things and all that stuff, I take some of those lessons that I learned with me, but it still looks like me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the important distinction is you're kind of following where you feel you need to go.
Right.
As opposed
where
to
I want
following
to go.
where you think you should be going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, is, which was my error in judgment several times over. So, yeah, really just embracing this is where I feel like my art's going. I'm gonna go for it, and you're you're reaping the rewards, so to speak. Wah, wah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think it's a confluence of where the art is going and just leaning into it and following it, but also it is where I want the art to go. It just so happens that this is a situation where for whatever reason I do seem to have the aptitude or the hand for pushing my art in this direction. It hasn't turned out to be a misstep. It was a step in a direction at one point, but it has paid off.
Awesome. So not only do you, hold on, edit time.
No edits.
Fine. I'm not going to edit this out just for you, Dave. I'm not going to edit this out. Just don't listen back to it. Just trust me that I don't edit this out. All right. So not only are you an artist of many comics and gory illustrations and death metal logos, you're also a musician.
Yes.
And I've always, been kind of astounded by how like filthy comic creators are with musicians. Like it
Oh
seems like
yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
throw a rock without hitting an artist or a writer or a colorist or someone who's also a musician. Like the previously mentioned Donnie Cates, he's a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
There's everyone from like Greg Capullo to Ben Dewey to I hope I'm getting the right person, Joe Casey to everyone's like there's musicians just everywhere. And I've always been really attracted to the melding of like comics and music. And I've always kind of want to ask this of comic musicians, like, is there a project you could see yourself doing where it's like, oh, I also like wrote an EP to go with this crazy thing, perhaps this or something like that, like making your own little soundtracks or anything like that? Or is it something like they scratch different itches in your brain and they don't really overlap too much?
For me, they scratch different itches, for sure. I mean, you are absolutely right. I think for a lot of people, I see a lot of crossover between like the hardcore and punk scenes and comics. Not just musicians. Like, there's obviously a ton of musicians, but certainly people of our general age, 30s, 40s, who came up in the punk scene, like, there is a work ethic and an attitude of real, a DIY-centric attitude that we all seem to have where, I mean, we can attribute it to Fugazi, right? Who is just like, they wanted to do something, so they did it. We wanted to make comics, so we did it. Who cares if our comics aren't getting put out by Marvel or DC? We're making comics, so we're putting them out, right? We're doing what needs to get done to get them out. For me, I think they really do scratch different itches. I have certainly done artwork for some of my bands, design merch and stuff like that. But that's an interesting question because, yeah, you've done music and art kind of synergy things. Tyler Crook did a soundtrack for Harrow County. So it's not a super common thing, but to be perfectly honest, it never really occurred to me. Like, there's never been a moment where I've been working on something and I've been like, I should write music to go with this.
So you're saying you've never been, drawing comics, which is difficult enough as it is, and saying, how can I make this harder on myself?
Yeah, no, I guess not. That's an
or
interesting
writing
question.
music and saying, you know what, I should really try to tie in something else to this because that's going to make things a lot easier for me right now.
Right. Well, let me ask you, do you how do you feel like the response has been to your we'll call them like soundtrack efforts, like the theme songs that you've written for your books and stuff? And
I feel like it's been mixed. I never hear bad things.
Okay.
Which is fine. Like, if someone had a criticism about it, I would be, I got thick skin about that kind of stuff. 'Cause, well, just most recently, I was at C2E2, and I had made, for my book Packs of the Low Country, I had made a soundtrack, and I burned CDs and made a little CD pack and all this other stuff for it. And I've sold like a handful the past couple of years, but this past weekend I sold a whole bunch, and people seem to be genuinely excited about it. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, and I didn't even think about that. And then like on the way in, to the show on Sunday, I'm like, I haven't listened to this stuff in forever. Let me listen to it.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to it, and I'm just like, I'm half of it. I'm like, man, I don't remember doing this, and the other half was like, I don't believe I did this. Because for me, there's like for music is such a weird disconnect for me in terms of like my brain from like the rest of like the creative side of my brain from the rest of me. Like I don't, almost to a fault, I don't like overthink a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of follow it down and see what comes of it and do all these things. I might overthink when it comes to mixing or something like that, but when it comes to the general creation of it, and I think that's because for me, comics and music will always be forever linked at this point.
Mm-hmm.
There will never be a project I do that is my own work that I don't produce some type of music for. I just don't see it. I just don't see it happening. I have projects that, I have, half thumbnailed, half written, but I also have demos of things that I know are going to go with that.
Right.
And if there's things I'm having trouble with, I have, my digital sketchbook of riffs and things like that I can like just listen back to and like say, oh, you know what, this is something that fits in here, and this is something that fits in here. So for me, yeah, they're like forever linked. Even so much as this month I had on my Patreon with my comic, every month I'm putting out a song to go with that month's pages, and I had a song all planned, recorded, ready. It's been ready for a while, and then I woke up and I'm like, oh no, I got this one. So now I'm scrambling to get this one, done and fully formed because it just fits better. So it's completely, it's when I asked you if like this scratches the same, a different itch, and for me it's kind of like I have to do both,
Sure.
It's only like half of the equation for that.
I think I'm a little bit different too in that, well, I mean, I know that you played in bands quite a bit in the past, but like I've been playing guitar now for, over 25 years, and I've been playing in bands for over 20 years, and there's never really been a time where I haven't played in bands. So I love playing music, and I love playing in my band, and I love playing shows. But the reality is I don't play guitar at home. I don't really think about writing music very much when I'm at home. My band, we do a lot of writing in the practice space together, and that's kind of when my brain goes into that mode. So I don't really sit at home and just play guitar. If I'm sitting at home and being creative, I'm drawing. So my brain doesn't really link the two because their role in my life is pretty different.
Okay. No, completely understandable.
Yeah.
Because as as of right now, and probably for the foreseeable future until I'm like 50 and I'm playing in a bar rock band on the weekends to pass the time.
Right.
I'm not in a band right now. I'm a one man operation. I don't even have a guitar amp. Everything I have is my guitars and my basses and a couple pedals, and that's it. And everything's just like direct into the computer and tweaked and managed there. So I am so far away from playing in out and in a band or having like a regular practice routine. Because even though I do I think write a decent amount of music, it is crammed into when I have time. Like,
Oh yeah,
like
absolutely.
this
Yeah.
morning, I had 30 minutes, and I'm like, well, this page I'm working on, to get into it, I'm gonna need more than 30 minutes. So let me sit down and work on this thing, because I can pick up and drop off. With music, it's easier for me to pick it up and drop it. Drop it and then move on to what I got to do.
Oh sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah. Cause I'm. If I was in the same position as you, I would say, with having bands and having the practice routine and all that, I would probably be in the same boat. Like, I would probably have a little bit more of a separation, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I have everything in front of me at all times.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
I can, in the time it takes to open up my recording program, I can switch from penciling a page to writing a riff or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I've it's probably incredibly inefficient. It is incredibly inefficient. Not so much in the getting things started, but like in the, I'll literally be drawing a panel on my digitally or whatever, and then just something pops in my head, and I'm like, okay, I have to force myself to finish what I'm doing, and then pop over, pull the guitar down real quick, plug it in, figure out this thing in my head, put it back, and then go back to the page.
Right.
But it also is incredibly, how do I say? I get a huge sense of satisfaction when I have like the completed project.
Sure.
And I have all
sure,
that.
Yeah.
Because doing Pax of the Low Country, which was a big, almost 200-page graphic novel, by the time it was done, and having like 45 minutes of music, which was really me learning how to compose music. That wasn't all, thrash songs. It was this huge undertaking for me, and it's just, I have a huge sense of accomplishment with it, and I think maybe that's kind of rolling into my desire and my kind of feeding me to keep doing this, because I feel like I'm only getting better at things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, especially with the stuff I've been doing lately, I feel like I feel like this is where I need to go, as opposed to
Sure.
thinking, no, I need to sit down and do sample pages and draw Spider-Man swinging through the city, and and then I have friends tell me like, hey, like, it seems like you didn't really want to draw these, and it's like, no, I didn't. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
man. I've been
that,
telling you that for years.
kind of getting that realization of like, and back to the best, I have to keep going back and reminding myself that the best advice I ever got was, do your own thing, because no one else is ever going to do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
And I'm glad I have friends that I can look at who have done that and be like, yeah, this is the right path to go through. This emboldens me a little bit to be a little bit less scared about, not trying to go down a traditional path, or, trusting myself more. And you're one of those people who I look at, I'm like, you know what? Dave found his thing. He went after it, and, I should too.
Oh, well, thanks, man. I mean, I'm really glad that I could. That sounds kind of dumb, but I'm really glad that like I could do that for you. That's a weird way to put it, but
you can say you inspired me, Dave. It's okay.
Sure, but I mean, like, we pretty much have come up together. We're in the same quote unquote generation of, comics guys. We pretty much started making comics at the same time, and pretty much started tabling at shows at the same time, and it's I'm glad that we can kind of, as a community, still do that for each other, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense, because it's, it's something often said in comics where it's like, a lot of newer creators are kind of looking at the people past them, like, oh, I need to be with this person. It's like you need to look at your peripheral, and whether it's just striking up a
Mm-hmm.
friendship or a collaboration, like these are the people you're going to be coming up with, and these are the people
Yeah.
you should be, you know, trying to invest relationships with.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree.
And you
Yeah.
know, and I'm not trying to say it to make it sound like it's clinical, because I think the relationships I do have in comics were ones that were formed more organically, because there's people in comics where I thought like, oh man, you know, looking at my interest and that person's interest and all that, like we'd be like really good friends, and it's just like nothing. And it's not like an ill will towards the person, or like the person's a bad person or whatever. It's just like, oh no, we just don't have any kind of like, you know, personal connection,
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
and despite having like 95% same interests.
It is
Which,
kind of rare to have a very intense personal connection and the same interests in the same scene like that. Like, you know, feel fortunate, like, all the time that Kelly and I became friends. You know, because really, like, because the two of us, like, hit all those boxes, in my opinion. Like, we have the same interests, you know, we get along really well, we don't mind sitting next to each other for all day, days in a row.
which is huge.
And then sitting next to each other in the hotel room all night for days in a row. And, like, you know,
And getting dinner and traveling sometimes.
yeah.
And
At this point, like, we get along so well, but we've known each other for long enough and have gotten close enough that, like, we do have an almost, like, familiar relationship at times where, like, I know we get on each other's nerves. But at the same time, we're just, like, it's the crew, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's rare to have that kind of thing. And when you do have that connection, you kind of need to, like, latch onto it and not let it go. You know, like, that's what we did with Marie. Like, you know, me and Kelly and Christian and Dave, we were, certainly me and Kelly and Christian and, well, certainly me and Kelly and Christian and Dave. We all had this tight group, and then, like, we just basically got introduced to Marie. This is Marie Anger, for anybody listening doesn't know who I'm talking about. And we were just like, oh, she's one of us. And then all of a sudden we were just like, you're with us now.
yeah, and that was a really,
And-
like, seems like a pretty sudden thing, to where it was just, you know, you and Kelly and Dave, and then, you know, Marie's there. And even this past C2E2, it was really weird not seeing all of you guys in a row tabling.
Yeah.
It was just like one of those things where it's like I'm so used to them. Like, I'm so used to seeing the 4-Star Studio guys from Chicago all in the main
Sure.
aisle. I'm so used to seeing you guys all bunched together, like, you know, in one of the later rows.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of weird not being there this year. And, you know, Marie didn't go either this year, actually. So it did feel kind of weird. I mean, Marie went and did another show out in Boston, and I didn't do anything. So in some ways it kind of felt like breaking up the band a little bit, but, you know,
Hopefully next
when we
year.
all end up in the same room, it's still every time it's just like, all right, let's go. We're rolling.
You're a
Like,
gang.
we're doing this together.
Art gang.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, like, you know, I've collaborated with Kelly. I've collaborated with Marie. I haven't with Dave. I would love to, but, like, Dave, in a lot of ways, I feel like is, like, slumming it, hanging out with us. You know, like, we love Dave, and, like, we're really tight friends. But, like, you know, Dave's worked on Ninja Turtles. Dave's worked on Godzilla. Like, Dave should be hanging out with, like,
He's the big brother who's just like, you know,
Yeah.
making sure you guys don't get into trouble.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I don't know.
No, I think
Yeah.
that's, you know, an awesome thing that you guys have is this, for lack of a better term, this art gang.
Yeah.
You got each other's backs, and you're close enough to where, you can have Dave's getting on my nerves about this, but then again, with relationships like that, it's like, well, I'd rather have Dave here getting on my nerves than like some other rando person like I have to deal with who I don't know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, at this point, like, even though Marie is like we'll call her a newer addition to the family, even though it's been years now, like I do consider her to basically just be family. Like, I think of her like she's my sister. Like, when I was going through that period of like crazy life explosion that I was talking about before, like, she was one of the only people that like checked in on me regularly, and half the time she would just send me like weird pictures of her birds and like memes and weird funny pictures and stuff. But it meant a lot just to know that she was there and making sure that I was okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, that's not something that a lot of people do. And Brian Level is actually one of them too. Like, when I was looking for an apartment at one point, Brian Level, like, I don't even know how this whole story, but Brian Level called in a favor from like some old friend he had that lives in Albuquerque. I have no idea. And Brian Level tried to help me find an apartment.
Wow.
And like, from that day forward, I was just like, Jesus, Brian, like I love Brian and I love Aaron, and we were buds before that, but ever since then I'm just like, you are one of the best people. Like, that dude tried to help me find an apartment from halfway across the country. That's so generous, and that's not something anybody else would ever do.
I say wow, but like I totally believe it, because very recently, I was going through a rough time myself, and I was doing a lot of remodeling on my house on myself, and it was just really hard on me. I had a lot of work to do, and I wasn't getting, and I'm telling Brian about it, and he's like, dude, do I need to come up and like help out, like paint like for like a weekend or something? Like, let me know. Yeah. And I'm like, what? Like, you're like 6 hours away in a car. Like, dude, what? And he would have done it. I fully know he would have just, dragged his whole self up here and, help me paint my house, and then, draw kick-ass comics at night or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. He absolutely would have.
Brian's one of those like so intensely genuine people that it's almost like shocking every time, even though it's, we know that he's just a really good person, and he's a person who, practice what he preaches, and he's always been nothing short of like just kind, and so it's it's great that and I'm glad that we both had this experience with him, because it kind of shows the small world of comics, how that really is, because sure, there's plenty of people who we don't know at shows and things like that, but if you look at each other's circles long enough, you're gonna find overlap everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Dave. So, I've really enjoyed this chat with you. Is there anything upcoming that you would like to talk about? Anything, we need to keep our eyes open for? And on top of that, is there any, this being the Comics Coffee Metal podcast, is there anything you're enjoying in those realms lately that you kind of want to talk about? Because...
That's funny. I was actually just about to make a joke and be like, Don, I feel lied to. We did not talk about coffee. We did not talk about
Brian
metal.
Last episode made sure we jammed it in there in the end. So, I just didn't want to start off every podcast with "Tell me about comics, coffee, and metal." No, but you know what? It's something we all love.
Yeah. In terms of like work coming up, I don't have a ton that is like slated to come out. I have a lot of work that's in the bag and is kind of like, well, we'll see when it sees the light of day. But I know Brian mentioned Andy Eschenbach on his podcast, and so Andy, I might be spilling the beans here, but like Andy is working on a anthology where he's writing all of these body horror shorts and having different artists, illustrate them, comics, So I did one of those for Andy. Mine is called Hot Dog. If you follow me on Instagram or on Facebook or whatever, no doubt you saw me, about a year ago posting a lot of pictures of hot dogs and weird, almost like grotesque things. And so that's what that was for. And as of right now, I don't know if there's a plan for getting it out. I know he is still working on it. I know he's still getting pages from people. At one point it was talking about a Kickstarter or maybe approaching a publisher, but as far as that's all Andy, so I'm just kind of waiting and seeing what happens with that. I recently finished a project with a friend of mine who designs toys. And he designed this line of kind of heavy metal style Japanese vinyl toys. They're all kind of animal creatures. And he wrote like a little storybook, this kind of story of two of these characters, and he had me illustrate it. So it's kind of like storybook style, like pinup drawings of basically like these anthropomorphic monsters fighting.
Nice.
Which was super fun to do. And kind of talking about like the Valk thing earlier, like the things I learned from doing that, like I definitely got to bring some Kirby to this project, even though it's like metal animals fighting and it's lots of splatter.
That sounds pretty Kirby to me.
Yeah, but I got some Kirby in there. I'll have to send you the pages when I remember. And yeah, that's about it. I did that shirt for Donnie, like we started off talking about, and that is available now. It's available through Nakatomi, who, they do like Robert Wilson's posters and stuff like that. And other than that, just doing some band merch and logos and drawing, gross dripping corpses. The one I did last night, my coworker was like, "That was a juicy one." And I was like, that was a juicy one.
That's your new banner quote. That was a juicy one.
Yeah, I know. I'm actually, moving forward trying to, excuse me, kind of trying to break out of the rut of comic shows, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not going to stop doing them. I'm already actually, booked to do Rose City later this year. I'm probably going to go back to Memphis again. But I'm trying to mix it up and do some conventions and expos that aren't comics centric. So this won't be out before I do this, because I'm doing this in 2 days, but I'm doing like, the Oddities and Curiosities Expo in Albuquerque, which is people selling animal skulls and bones, and there's artists, and it's this kind of, essentially art expo of people kind of doing stuff in the same vein that I'm doing, but it's not comics. I am planning on doing Mad Monster, which is a horror convention in Arizona. I'm planning on doing that this summer. So I'm trying to do that sort of thing just to kind of expand, I guess.
No, it
reach a broader audience.
It makes total sense. It makes complete and total sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And it's interesting because, I for these other conventions, I'm not even bringing my comics. At least not to this one I'm doing coming up. I'm bringing art, I'm bringing shirts, I'm bringing prints, I'm bringing merch, and it's kind of not a more focused approach, but it's a differently focused approach for the different audience.
I think you're gonna do real well there, and I hope to hear that you've did gangbusters, especially with the the prints and the shirts and all that. I think that's definitely a smart thing to try to branch out to, because comic conventions can be very hit and miss.
Sure.
And having I have no experience with like an oddities or a horror convention or anything like that, but I would be less surprised to find out people would probably spend more money at those types of things because because they are kind of niche.
Right.
So the people who are there are going to be even more intensely passionate than comic fans who are already intensely passionate.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Like, it's totally uncharted territory for me. So, like this weekend, I'm kind of like, this is the kind of thing that people go into to spend money. But if somebody has $300 in their pocket and they want to buy an elk skull with fucking huge ass antlers,
Mm-hmm.
are they going to have any money left over to buy some of my art? Oh. I don't know.
Also, I have to imagine if table costs if people cheaper.
Yes and no.
Okay.
It depends. Some of the ones I've looked into are actually more expensive.
Oof. Okay.
But, it's hard to say, It's like these people going to the horror convention, are they going to have money to buy one of my shirts after they buy a vintage Halloween poster? Mm-hmm. I don't know. We're going to find out. But, so yeah, that's what I have, like, work-wise coming up. Let's see, metal. Oh, geez, I don't know. I listen to so much.
Yeah,
I'm always buying records.
Usually, when you post something, I always have to like go and just like check them out, just to see if that's one of the overlaps we have, because we don't have a ton of bands that overlap, or I guess necessarily styles, but sometimes there's some hits, so I always have to make sure if you're posting something or Brian's posting something or Kelly's posting something, like, okay, let me see who this is.
I tend to veer on the more extreme side than either of those guys more often than not. There's a lot of overlap between me and Brian and me and Kelly, certainly. But there's definitely some stuff I listen to that I know is just unpalatable even for metal fans. I'm trying to think of like what I've been listening to recently a lot. I've been listening to the last Napalm Death record a lot. It's called Apex Predator Easy Meat, and it came out a couple years ago, but I think since they are touring and they just are definitely going to be putting out a new album soon, I've kind of been in the mood. Mm-hmm. So I've been listening to that one a lot. Honestly, like, the last High on Fire record, called Electric Messiah.
Yeah.
I got super, super into, which is weird because I'm actually not a big High on Fire fan, but that record just like is so good. It's just wild and unhinged, and Matt Pike sounds like he's a homeless person under a bridge screaming about the apocalypse. It's just like, it's awesome. It just rips.
Nice.
I've been listening to a lot of Motorhead recently. I've been on a real Motorhead kick.
I was on one of those about a year ago myself.
Yeah, it's real easy. It's real easy to get into a Motorhead kick. Other than that, yeah, I mean, like, I listen to a lot of death metal and a lot of, black metal, and I came across this band not that long ago called Asagram, and they're an all-female black metal band from like Germany or something. They're pretty great. Just got a new record from this band called Sentient Divide, and they're just kind of gross, cavernous death metal.
Okay.
Oh, here's one that you might actually like. There's this band called Enforced. And Enforced, we actually maybe even talked about them already, but, they're very much in that power trip vein of, like, real throwback thrash style.
Okay.
Except their singer just, like, sounds, like, super pissed off all the time.
No, I think we tweeted about this. Yeah, I think you brought them up, and I'm like, hey, yeah, these are good. This is good.
Yeah, those guys rip pretty hard. They're pretty great. So I guess that's it for like them. I could.
That's a.
We're those people that like we could talk about this sort of thing forever.
Well, we
it's
actually
kind of
started
funny,
talking
like,
about like guitar gear and all that. That's gonna be a separate podcast.
I know, right? It's funny. We both know Daniel Warren Johnson a little bit.
Yeah.
When I first met Daniel, I was wearing an Iron Maiden shirt, and he started talking to me about Carcass, who I'm also a huge fan of, and ever since then, every time I see Daniel, every single time, he asks me what I'm listening to and asks me if I've heard something that he is really into at the moment. It's like every time I see Daniel and he's just like, dude, have you heard the Outer Heaven record or whatever it might be? It's just funny because like it's been years now. A couple of times a year I got to have the like metal conversation with Daniel. So, going into shows where I know I'm going to see him, I always try and have a couple like on deck, just to like
that's the thing, like with comics and metal people, is like we love what we love, and it's again, all the bands that I'm really digging, like you would probably be like, no, not for me, but it's all still metal, and I've mentioned this before on previous shows, like there's so many different genres of metal that it's like its own ecosystem almost. I mean, and you can but you can kind of circle most people's Venn diagram of like most people can agree on like one of the big four thrash bands. Like, yeah, that's that's one of the bands I started with, or so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the big four, more importantly than being good bands, because it could be argued that they're not all great. Certainly all of their output is not great, but more than anything, they are the four that are like the gateway for so many people.
Yeah.
Like unless you got into metal in the 70s, one of the first bands that you got into was Metallica. Mm-hmm. It's just the way it goes. Yeah. It's like they're the gateway because they were the ones that were big enough.
Yeah.
That
And their vocals weren't
were
Tom Araya screaming. They weren't,
right.
Joey Belladonna screeching. They weren't Dave, Mustaine snarling. They were more
Yeah.
palatable to the average person.
Sure.
Let me ask you this
Yeah.
then. Let's pivot away a little bit.
Yeah.
You got the big four: Metallica, Anthrax, Megadeth, Slayer. Who do you take away from there and put in as more appropriate? You think, or do you think that big four is appropriate? Because you can't argue that those four aren't the most successful.
Right.
But
man, I think it's really tough because it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about accessibility and being the gateway, I don't know that you have a bigger gateway for certainly American heavy metal, right? I think it could definitely be argued that Megadeth and Anthrax could go away and be replaced by Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, right? I mean, something like that.
That's interesting.
I actually am not a huge Slayer fan, but they're like the Nirvana of metal, right? Like they're just too important to be ignored, whether you like them or not.
Yeah.
That's a tough question. If you're talking about quality,
you gave me an excellent answer. Like you put Iron Maiden and Judas Priest with Metallica and Slayer. It's like it's hard to like argue that.
Right. Yeah,
in my brain, I'm thinking, well, I'd swap Anthrax with Testament, and but that's probably more of a personal preference thing. 'Cause I don't know, because Testament's one of those bands that they started off really strong. They kind of like were fine. But like the most recent output in the past few years has just been like, holy shit! Like, how old are these guys? Like they're just kicking ass.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, like I actually just tweeted about this like last week, I think. But for me, I think like Bolt Thrower is better than Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax, and half of Metallica's catalog.
But Bolt Thrower is a blind spot for me. I'm gonna have to dig in and check these guys out.
Yeah, man. I mean, granted, they do sway a little bit more to the death side. They're British, so that's a hurdle for American people too. They're less accessible. They never had the level of success either. But in terms of like quality, they should be up there. Like they should have the acclaim of all those other bands, I think.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, and as you, I don't want to disappoint you, so I have to ask, what kind of coffee you been drinking lately? Do you have a specific brand you go to every time, or is this kind of like whatever's on sale?
We get our coffee from a local coffee roaster. So, no specific brand. We go to Michael Thomas Coffee in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I just kind of look at the wall. They kind of roast in small batches, so it's all fresh and it's all well roasted. And I just kind of look at the wall when I go in and pick two that I think look good.
Nice. I wish we had something more like that around here. That's the problem with living in the burbs.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so yeah, no brand or anything. Just
do you prefer like a darker roast or like a lighter, more like a acidic?
I actually just straight medium.
Okay.
Like I don't if it gets too roasted and it gets too dark, I don't like it.
Okay.
I like light roasts when they are fresh and very hot, but once they start to cool, I don't like them quite as much.
Okay.
So I tend to go straight medium because it maintains its flavor and holds up, over the cooling process. And I don't have to worry about drinking it right away, and I don't have to worry about treating it because it tastes burnt.
Awesome. That's some good inside baseball on your preferences. No, it's great. I love knowing this kind of stuff about people, just because it seems so like not necessarily frivolous, but it's like it's just their coffee, but it's like but everyone's like so specific and like it's kind of deeply personal. Like, no, this is this is what I like.
Right.
Especially with your like, not this because when it gets cold, I don't like it.
Right. Legit, the best piece of like coffee advice I give anybody is get a good grinder and grind your beans as freshly as possible. It's like, it's night and day. If you get a good grinder and grind them right before you brew them, it doesn't matter what you're brewing them in. It tastes so much better, like that freshness.
Now, are you,
You know?
one of the people who are like automatic coffee makers or the devil, pour over
No.
only or French press only, or?
No, I have pour over methods. I have a Chemex. I have a single serve pour over. I have an AeroPress. But the fact of the matter is I don't have time
Yeah.
to do the Chemex in the morning. I got to just get the coffee maker going, hit go, shower, eat breakfast, all this stuff. Like, it takes time. And I will say that the Chemex does make pretty much the best cup of coffee I've ever had. But I don't have the time for that. I don't have the energy for that most of the time. So that's
not every
like,
cup you have has to be the best cup.
yeah.
It has to, it just
So
has
the
to get you
Chemex
going.
is the Chemex is for like the weekend.
Okay.
When I got some time, if I wake up before the girlfriend a little bit early and I have time to kind of like make my own cup of coffee, you know?
Yeah,
That's when the Chemex comes out.
yeah, it's kind of like me and my wife. We we buy Javalia store bought pre-ground just because with two kids, two little kids in the morning.
Oh yeah.
The fastest route from brew to in our systems is always the best one. But occasionally
Yeah,
we'll go
absolutely.
and we'll find we'll find a nice bag we each prefer, because she likes some of the more flavored ones. I like just trying different, darker, more kind of like chocolatey type blends.
Mhm.
And then we'll do a French, we'll grind it and do a French press and something like that. But I've been
Yeah.
considering the pour overs, but I'm like, it just seems like a lot of work for not a lot of effort right now. For more effort than I'm willing to put through right now.
No, that's fair. And like, when I worked at home, I was Chemex every day. But like, I worked at home, so I could do it.
Yeah.
I had the time. I didn't need to get my pot brewed so I could get out the door and go to work. So there's a balance there. But even then, like, getting decent beans and grinding them as freshly as possible still makes a big difference. But
I can attest to. Yes, that is.
Yeah.
If you can do it, because.
yeah, for sure.
And also, it just makes your house smell that much more amazing.
Yeah, that's true. That is definitely true.
All right, Dave. Well, I really enjoyed this chat. I like getting to the nitty-gritty of your process on things and the nitty-gritty of how you make your coffee.
Yeah, man, same. I've been looking forward to this, so I'm glad we finally got to do it.
This is probably been like a year in the making, us actually sitting down and doing this. And
I think it was like maybe 6 months ago that we first talked about it.
well, it feels like
So it's not that.
probably
it's not that bad.
probably a year since I had the idea to like, I have Dave on the show. So yeah, it's definitely been a long time coming. Hopefully it won't be that long before we have a chance to chat again.
Yeah, man, I'd love to.
All right, Dave. Is there anything you want to say before we go, or we good?
Well,
Where can people find you online?
yeah, I was just gonna say on Twitter and Instagram, I am at @ThatDaveJordan, as ThatDaveJordan, and yeah, that's the best place to find me. Twitter and Instagram. I am on Facebook, but it's just basically stuff reposted from the other places. And if you follow me on Twitter, yes, I post about new metal records a lot. So you'll frequently see me saying something totally rips with like, a Spotify or Bandcamp link.
All right. Well, Dave, thanks again.
Thank you, Don. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening.